Welcome back to the Liberty Perspective. I'm Joe Marshall. Today I got a show put together for you around human rights. And human rights has nothing to do with our founding principles. You know, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it was in 1948. And they came into being, I don't know, after 1945 or 46 fireside chats of FDR's New Deal, right? Where he was saying that America, our founding principles and our the individual rights and liberty enshrined in our Declaration of Independence and protected in the Bill of Rights. They got us to where we are, the greatest country in the world and the richest country in the world. But, now we need something more. But when you understand, and then out of those, what he called the Workers' Bill of Rights, or the new Bill of Workers' Rights, I think he called them. Then, his wife Eleanor kind of molded them into the human rights, what are the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights today. But when you understand natural law, as John Locke laid it out, it's God's law, the state of nature before society. There was God's law. There was a right and a wrong. It's our individual rights and liberty are derived from that natural law, from God's law. As John Locke, documents in his treatise, second treatise or whatever it was. And it's one of the reasons why progressives hate John Locke so much. They hate him. Because he brings God into the equation. He doesn't take God out of the equation. Progressive doctrine, social contract doctrine, collectivist doctrine from the get-go, like I've said before a million times, you can't present an argument for a collectivist society without first presenting an argument against the very existence of God, as Rousseau and Hobbes do in their, as they refer to their state of nature, where every man is at war with every man because there's no rules, there's no regulations, there's no just, there's no unjust. Plato said the same thing, basically, right? Not until human laws are made that force people to be free, that force people to be just, and after that force of just is only then can there be justice kind of crap, It's all that secular stuff where and then human rights law, even when they refer to natural law and human rights, it's a secularized natural right. It's a natural right that's secularized just for being human. That doesn't come from nature or our creator, be it nature or nature's God. It comes from just being human. But these are some of the things that are differences. But what's happening today is I got an email from the Brownstone Institute. It kind of drove me to doing this show because, as I've done before, I've done a show before on the Brownstone Institute as human rights advocates that they are. They're human rights advocates. I don't know, anarcho-capitalists, Rothbard libertarians. You got to remember, the same with the von Mises Institute, that are the people that are all hooked up together. Malone was over there at the von Mises Institute, with his anti-capitalist message and his psyops, right? The psyops of his psy war. I did a show on that too. They're all human rights advocates, and everything's in the context of human rights. And that Rothbard guy, when I was at the Brownstone, I asked Jeffrey Tucker. I asked him myself, and there's people, witnesses, you know what I mean? Known and unknown, probably. But there were witnesses. When I asked him about human rights directions that the Brownstone Institute was going, he said, they're the same. They're the same as our individual rights and liberties. No, they're not. And I asked him, well, what kind of... He says, well, I'm a libertarian, and libertarians and human rights, that we believe in the individual rights and everything. I says, okay, well, what kind of libertarian are you? Because he's telling me that he's a libertarian, but you could be anything from a full-blown socialist, libertarian socialist, right? Or basically an anarchist, and you're still a libertarian, you know? But he says, well, I go by, Rothbard. Mises Institute, in Rothbard, right? Oh, I says, Rothbard, you mean the guy who says that the Constitution is illegitimate and that our founding republic is illegitimate? Yeah. That Rothbard of that von Mises Institute, of those libertarians that Jeffrey Tucker said he associated himself with. They're not friends of our founding principles. They're not friends of our founding republic. They're not friends of our Constitution. They refer to the Constitution as being illegitimate. I mean, look it up. I did a show on it, and I talk about it in a couple different places. But anyways, I don't want to get any more detail about that type of thing. But this kind of sets the ground. It kind of sets the place from where I want to take off today with this show. In that, these people that are of the medical freedom movement, the intellectual powerhouses that these people are, we're fighting against the WHO. We're fighting against the WHO Constitution. They're fighting against the WHO. They're infringing on our human rights. So they're arguing for the medical freedom movement. The freedom in that medical freedom movement isn't our founding principles. It has nothing to do with our founding principles. It has nothing to do with the liberty enshrined in our Declaration of Independence. It has nothing to do with the individual rights and liberty as secured in our Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, So this is where I want to start today. I want to bring us back to 2018 so that we can kind of get a perspective of where we were in 2018. This is again before the pandemic, right? Can you see that? Yeah. Okay. Here's where we are. But anyways, take us back to 2018, and this was after the shooting at a school in Florida, and they had these students. It was at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas students. There was a school shooting. Like 17 people were shot and killed that day. That guy Cruz, whatever his name was, I can't remember, shot everybody up with an AR-15. But I want you to listen. I want you to listen to the first part of this interview that they gave with these kids that survived the school, just so that you can hear what they got to say.
Students from the high school are making an announcement today. 5 of them have joined us. And guys, I want you to know how sorry we are for what you went through and for the loss of your friends. Cameron, what's your announcement today?
Today, I'd like to announce that we have an event coming up to have everybody in the nation talking about what we're talking about. And one of the things we've been hearing is that it's not the time yet to talk about gun control. And we respect that. We've lost 17 lives, and our community took 17 bullets to the heart. And it's difficult to come back from that. So here's the time that we're going to talk about gun control. March 24th, we have the March for Our Lives, which you can find at marchforourlives.com, and expect to see us a lot. The March for Our Lives is going to be in every major city, and we are organizing it so students everywhere can beg for our lives. Because at the end of the...
Did you hear it? So students everywhere can beg for our lives. That's where he's at.
Today, this isn't about the red and blue, the GOP and the Democrats. This is about adults and kids. And at this point, you're either with us or against us. We are giving all our politicians a clean slate, and in the next election we are saying, if you are accepting money from the NRA, there is a badge of shame on you, because you are enabling things like this to happen.
David, do you have a specific agenda on how you think you can protect kids? Are these marches going to be mostly politicians talking to the crowds, or is this going to be students trying to mobilize other students?
This is a student-led grassroots movement, and
as it turned out, it wasn't a student-led movement. They put the students out in front, and they were full-blown leftist anti-gun groups and Hollywood people from Spielberg, Whitney, Whoopi Goldberg, you know, and those kind of, and Clooney, I think, was another one, you know, but
Judge Paul.
Sorry.
Students from the high school are making
Major city, and we are organizing it so students everywhere can beg for our lives. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about the red and blue, the GOP enabling things like this to happen.
David, do you have a specific agenda on...
And this is not a debate, this is a discussion between Americans, because we've had too many debates before, and we've gotten nowhere. We need a discussion where we hear both sides. From the Republicans, they can talk about mental health care, and from the Democrats, they can talk about gun control. But what we need to do here is come together, not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans, and work together to solve this issue through love and compassion, because this event occurred on Valentine's Day, sadly, and sadly, 17 people had to take a bullet to the heart, and so did our community. This is the time for change, and we can't let this ever happen again.
Well, let me pick up on that, because as terrible, and you know, I can't even imagine what you kids went through, as terrible as what happened at your school, I don't have to tell you, there have...
The shooting, I immediately went on Fox News, in fact, and talked about how this needed to be different, how this could not be just another mass shooting. We've had 18 this year since New Year's Eve, and now is the time for these special interest groups.
Finally, Emma, take us back to the shooting. How terrifying was it, and is this...
In our hallways, people are telling us that we should run for president. We want an...
Well, you got the points out of there that I wanted you to hear. They put these kids out there. You know, this is on Fox News. You can look it up if you want and listen to that interview if you want. But they had a lot of them where they put these kids out there to beg for our lives. And they said it was a student-led movement. And then they also did interviews there where they were kind of putting a wedge between the boomer generation, the older people in politics, and the younger generations, and there was a lot of different agendas that were being pushed they put these kids out there to push, you know. And anyways, it kind of sets the stage for where I want to bring us. In 2018, I wrote this article. Let's see. Let me see if I can find it now. No, I guess I can't find it. Well, I had... There it is. I got it. Sorry about that. You guys see that? Okay. It kind of sets the stage. Watch your eyes. Close your eyes. For where I want to read this article that I wrote back in 2018. Because I want us to remember, this is before the whole pandemic thing. And, you know, a lot of what I'm talking about here, you can apply it to what they did with us on the lockdowns. What they did, the social contract, psychological manipulation that they were using against us in their applied psychology tactics, that they were using motivational interviewing skills that they utilized, legit military-grade psychological operations that they use to get the doctors to leverage our trust in them as our most trusted source in medical information for maximum vaccine uptake. End of story. Maximum compliance with mass mandates and socialist distancing and all that other stuff, right? But I want to read down through this. And this is where we were in 2018, you know? The dignity of the right to self-defense in the age of gun control and Antonio Gramsci's New Intellectuals. It's basically a right to self-defense in the age of human rights. You can retitle this whole thing to that, because that's where it's going. The New Intellectuals that Gramsci wrote about, this guy Antonio Gramsci, he was a communist who was imprisoned by Mussolini in Italy, okay? And while he was in prison, he wrote, I don't know, 25, 30, give or take, what they call prison papers or prison notebooks, where, you know, a lot of the, then like the 70s, was it 60s or 70s or 80s or something in there, they were interpreted into English, and a lot of the academics started loving this guy's gradualist type of thing, slow walk across culture or something, sort of a Fabian socialist kind of a gradualism for communist revolution. And he talked about these new intellectuals, where we can take people in our schools and create new intellectuals that have a more collectivist mindset of thinking in our schools, and our schools should be doing this. And, you know, every time, you know, we have a class in school, put into school, you know, it's another round chambered. And every time we have a class graduating and going up into society, it's another shot fired into society by a revolution with all these quote-unquote new intellectuals, Gramsci called them, with this collectivist mindset and the conformity, or the mindset of conformity, right? And their handout for redistributive justice or whatever. So this is where we are with human rights. If you think human rights, you've got that new intellectual collectivist mindset that you've taken on. And I just want to bring us back to this. In 2018, I wrote this. As an American, one of the saddest things that I have witnessed yet is the growing rate, can you see that, and degree to which the broad wave of revolutionary progressive collectivism, has been able to successfully roll up and roll the up-and-coming generations of our own young into the mix of its rabid anti-Americanism. Just how quickly such revolutionaries were able to strike and begin utilizing the deaths, pain, trauma of these students and their families from Marjorie Stone Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, which we just watched, right, to move their revolution forward in the aftermath of such tragedy is testament to both how callous and how well organized their never let a crisis go to waste opportunism really is. As has become evident, in recent days, to a great many of these kids, it is nothing less than America's founding principles. Our limited Constitution, limited, you got to go to Federalist 78 to see what that is. Alexander Hamilton explains what a limited Constitution is. It limits the powers of government. Federalist 78. And as has become evident in recent days, and when I wrote this, to a great many of these kids, it is nothing less than America's founding principles, our limited Constitution, the freedom of individual liberty it secures, and of course, contemporary politicians' apparent unwillingness to override them. Unwillingness to override them that are blamed for all mass shootings and gun violence. These students have obviously been trained extremely well in how to view America through the doctrine of revolutionary progressive collectivism and have proved to now be more than ready to very effectively geez, I just lost my place. Sorry about that. Ready to very effectively add their progressive mindset, collectivist mindset, as the new intellectuals being pumped up into our society, okay? This is what critical theory does. This is what critical education does. This is what critical pedagogy does. The pedagogy of the oppressed, where the whole of the United States and everything in it, the kids are being taught how to view everything critical and only all things critical of the society targeted for destruction, which is ours, in this case, ours, okay? These kids, they get a critical conscious or a critical awareness of all things critical. It's not the critical thinking that we knew, where we thought everything through critically in order to come up with, you know, the right answer on things. We would take as much information as possible, think through it critically, called critical thinking. Critical thinking isn't the same anymore, not with the revolution. Everything about America is taught from the perspective of the revolution, targeting our founding principles for destruction, targeting our founding republic for destruction, targeting our individual rights and liberty for destruction. Okay? But that's where we are. They have been trained extremely well in how to view America through the doctrine of revolutionary progressive collectivism and have proved to now be more than ready to very effectively add their progressive mindset and voice to its revolution against the very idea of our own country. America is founded. But it is their indoctrination so complete that there are no minds or voices left among them who might question the wisdom of so quickly feeding into the faction of such a viral revolution? Under the weight of progressive intolerance and independent thought, under the weight of progressive intolerance of independent thought, we may never know. However, it's much for those of them who may be out there as much as it is for liberty itself, that I am moved to submit this work. I think David Leach at Strident Conservative may have published it. I can't remember if he actually did or not. But to see and understand why the gun control they are demanding is fundamentally at odds with America as founded and their individual rights and liberty, that would require thinking outside the collective box they've been so effectively being folded into for decades. Now, it isn't just these kids that are stuck in this collectivist box. You know, it's not just these kids that are stuck in this collectivist box, and this is why I'm doing this show today and why I'm going here. Because I was pointing this out 7 years ago, that these people, the collectivist mindset of America, we have lost our rugged individualism mindset. We have lost it. But the Brownstone Institute, the academics at the Brownstone Institute, the academics at the Brownstone, the academics that the Brownstone are associating with, the global governance people, the human rights people. I mean, they're all advocating for some solution against collectivism from within the realm of collectivism itself. And human rights is a perfect example, and that's why human rights is slave speak. It's literally slave speak. If you're speaking of your freedom in terms of human rights, if you're speaking in terms of your liberty and rights in the context of human rights, you're basically endorsing your own enslavement. That's what it is. That's where we are. But though not impossible, it is a tough one to ask of them, to say the least. And given the growing populism, is using populism back then, as much depends as such demands, neither would most politicians. Yeah, and given the growing populism of such demands for gun control, Neither would most politicians, Republican or Democrat, be able to think outside of that same progressive box, for that matter, past the pragmatism of a popular capitulation. Yeah. To objectively consider the full implication of complying with any such demand. Yeah. Everything's in politics today. Liberty has no voice in the pragmatism of politics today, of the pragmatic dialectal of politics today, where you go nowhere unless you sacrifice, I don't know, because truth is in the middle, right? Can't let perfect be the enemy of good here, right? I mean, how many people left and right? I did a whole show on that. Pragmatism. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of good, right? But this is what we're dealing with in politics today. There's no defense of our founding principles whatsoever. And the politicians, boomers or not, are just as collectivized as these up and coming generations, if not more in some cases, right? I mean, yeah. So, as to say, I wouldn't expect to see any profound or historical stand on principle from any of them, including in particular, I'm sorry to say, our progressive president, which was Trump. Right. The other thing was, I wanted to show you this. I wanted to show you this. Yeah, after that, it was in February of 2018 that they had that school shooting, and these kids came out and they started their March for Our Lives so that they can beg for their lives, right? Beg for their lives. It wasn't long, before that, Trump called for raising the minimum age to buy guns. There it is. There's a headline right there, right? I guess he backed off on it a little while, but he was playing in the politics. He wound up taking bump stocks, as if bump stocks are what made the guns do rapid fire, right? Or what they said, automatic fire. Bump stocks. It's not the bump stocks. It's the gas operation that does that. Gas operated semi-automatic. That's what does it. You hold it just right, or have anything hold just right. It'll shoot It'll shoot slow automatic, but whatever. So if they were gonna actually have an effect, they'd have to get rid of all gas-operated semi-automatics, which would include shotguns, right? Semi-automatic hunting rifles, right? But yeah, Trump called for that. Then you've got let me see. Rick Scott was a governor, NRA member, right? He signs a gun bill. Trump, take guns first, go through due process second. So he's out there talking about red flag laws. The NRA starts bragging about how they were the ones who came up with background checks and they supported red flag laws. Rick Scott, another one here from Rick Scott. I'm a gun owner and an NRA member, and I support red flag laws to help stop mass shootings. No defense of our founding principles and why we have a right to bear arms, or what it even means, or is it a right to self-defense and a right to bear arms in which to defend them with the cause of all these things, or is it progressive policies that left these kids basically fish in a barrel, that left everybody in all these gun-free zones fish in a freaking barrel, right? I mean, I don't know, But anyways, I kind of wanted to show you that just so that you can there. Go back. I wanted to show you that just because all these politicians, including Trump, they couldn't wait to capitulate or play politics with the whole thing, right? Whether they wound up enacting gun laws or not, it didn't matter. They all did. They all did. And the NRA itself, as you know, we'll see, and I've showed before, the NRA itself was out there defending our right to keep and bear arms as a human right, not an individual right, not a natural individual right, as a human right. And as I'm going to get into, there's no such thing as a right to even self-defense as a human right. Not to mention an armed right to defense. You know, then you got to get into the whole philosophy of things and run it downstream here. You know, let's run this downstream. Let's say, okay, well, if you don't have a right to self-defense, you can't have a right to bear arms in order to use the right to arms in which to defend it with. And if you don't have a right to self-defense or the right to anything in which to defend yourself with, do you have a right to life? Do you have a right to life? Person status or non-person status, do you have a right to life? The answer is no. You don't have a right to life. You don't have an individual right to life. You can have a collective right to life, which human rights give you an individual collective right to life. But as you'll see in doctrine, as you see in human rights law, international human rights law, the collectivism of human rights law, that right to life, even that individual right to life as a collective right that doesn't exist if it doesn't work to the benefit of the central planners, if it doesn't benefit the collective, and it's the right to life of society that takes priority over any individual. That's collectivist doctrine. That's human rights law doctrine. You know, I'll be showing you some of that. It was called the Frey Report. The United Nations Frey, F-R-E-Y. But we'll get into that. To be honest, I don't think any but a small handful would even be capable of it. So as to say, I wouldn't expect to see any profound historical stand on principle from any of them, including any in particular. I'm sorry to say our progressive president. Trump's a progressive through and through, no doubt. To be honest, I don't think any but a small handful would even be capable of it. The age of Antonio Gramsci's new stratum of intellectuals with new modes of thought towards the collective conception of the world, a collective conception of the world, necessary to complete the fundamental transformation of America from the bottom to the top. So you've got the bottom up. That whole bottom up thing people are always talking about. We need a bottom up. Well, in collectivism, the people are the bottom. The individuals are the bottom. But from our founding principles perspective, the people are the top. The government gets its power from the people. Everything that the government has is from the people. As a matter of fact, if you read the Declaration of Independence, we don't get our rights from government. We don't get jack shit from our government. The government got limited powers from us. That whole human rights history of what freedom and liberty is, going back to the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was a king, a government, with plebes, all people, all living for the sake of others, just like in any other collective, a centrally planned society, just like any other collective, right? Acknowledging grudgingly the limited rights of a limited amount of individuals. Where our Declaration of Independence was we the people, the whole people, acknowledging the limited powers of government. 180 degrees opposite. That's the mindset. That is exemplary of how opposite a collectivist mindset is versus an individual liberty mindset, a free mindset. You know? Just another thought to put in there, you know. But yeah, that's Gramsci's, right out of Gramsci's prison papers. And you can read it says New Intellectual at the top. This is Marxist.org has got this Gramsci, this whole, see, there it is, the formation of intellectuals. You know, I wrote a thing. Close your eyes for a second. I wrote a thing. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. I wrote I did a show on Matthias Desmond's mass formation, the collectivism of his mass formation, and there. Gramsci actually wrote about mass formation. You know, Matthias Desmond ain't the first one to come up with it. But Gramsci called capitalism a mass formation, okay? So, I mean, and if you watch my show on that, I spell out how Matthias Desmond's book isn't a fight for freedom, isn't a fight for liberty or anything like, well, of anything close. He actually blames the individualism of our founding principles for all totalitarian states hitherto known to man, including Stalin and Hitler. How individualism winds up being put to blame for the collectivism of fascism and communism is genius. It's a projection that is if you buy into it, it's you got to give credit where credit's due. It's maniacally genius, you know. But just a small clip out of that paper, just to show you where we are with Gramsci's new intellectuals and what we're dealing with these kids coming up into society, and even our politicians. I mean, they've been in the New Deal, freaking collectivization. It's been going on for a while since Woodrow Wilson. Past 150 years, you got to remember, America's mindset is becoming more and more collectivized, in leaps and bounds as we get past the New Deal, right? The collectivist intellectual, this is what I wrote in that Matthias Desmond, mass formation from a liberty perspective is what it was. As we know, there's a multitude of things at work affecting the social statics and dynamics. Those are the things that make society work, and also what the government needs to do to change these things, the power it needs and stuff like that. Just basically. Versus rule of law, which is our Constitution, especially Article 6 of the Constitution, our rule of law, where in Article 6, anybody that's in government has to swear an oath to the Constitution. Or the collectivism of nationalism or anything else goes back to, people, pledging allegiance to the government, their flag of government or whatever. Just it's the nationalism that was the nationalist that wrote that. Bellamy, Francis Bellamy, nationalist through and through, wrote it for nationalist purposes. Our founders didn't pledge allegiance to the government or anything else. They wrote in the Constitution that anybody in government should pledge their allegiance to the support and defense, to defend and support the Constitution, which preserved the liberties of the people. I mean, it's become patriotic to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm not going to, say that it isn't patriotic. I'm just saying we don't even realize sometimes how collectivist we've come in our society, the things that we do, and we don't even see them as collectivists when they're collectivist, purely collectivist. Nationalist is collectivist in origin. But anyways, what I'm trying to get here is, he noted how mass formation, and Gramsci noted how mass formation of the capitalist hegemony of free societies, hegemony is a Gramscian word too, of free societies, standardized individuals both psychologically and in terms of individual qualification. To deconstruct that and enable socialism, he prescribed the mass production of new intellectuals steeped in a godless humanistic collectivism and a new conception of the world. These new intellectuals were to one day organically lead the masses, who will themselves be molded into a certain kind of conformism proposed to them as freedom. See it. Okay. This is where we are. This is human rights. This is the conformism proposed to you as freedom. Human rights are slave speak. They are the conformism proposed as freedom that we've bought into. It's a trap. And once you've bought into that, the freest you can get is conformism. Yeah. Proposed to them as freedom in an automatic, spontaneous consent. See, what happens is once you've been trained into this, is once you get into this mindset and you have this this new conception of the world, this collectivist conception of the world, humanistic, godless collectivism, and the new intellectuals that are organically going to stand up, you won't even have to think about it. You respond in a spontaneous consent. They order you to lock down, you spontaneously consent. You order you to wear a mask, you spontaneously consent because of the mindset, the collectivist mindset. They order you to wear a mask and you spontaneously consent. They tell you, they bring up social contract theory that you're obligated, your individual rights don't have nothing to do with override your responsibility to the collective. So you got to wear the mask when you go to grandma's, or grandma and grandpa, you got to wear the mask when you go over to see your kids. You got to get vaccinated before you can see the kids. Spontaneous consent. Can you see it? This is where I'm coming from. Mini P is demanding my attention. But anyways, where was I? Yes. These new intellectuals were to one day organically lead the masses who will themselves be molded into a certain kind of conformism proposed to them as freedom. All these medical freedom people out there fighting for human rights they're the guys that are out there that are organically, the populist nationalists that are organically all collectivist mindset, whether they're nationalist, communist, or anarchist, they're all collectivist mindset. They're all collectivist mindset. Leading the way so that everything that they're going to fight for against this collectivism is a collectivist cure for the collectivist problem. But collectivism can't cure collectivism. Only our individual rights and liberty can do that. You see what I'm saying? Only individualism can cure collectivism. This is what I'm trying to get at here. Yeah. Just a few decades later, and it seems our progressive chickens have come home to roost, and now we're looking to undo the collectivist mass formation. Gramsci prescribed to undo the mass formation of capitalism. That's why the whole Matthias Desmet thing is like, he's going to undo the mass formation. So that they're trying to say, Gramsci put in place to undo the mass formation of capitalism, or as it were, the free enterprise of individual liberty. Anyways, I wanted to read that to you on, sorry about that. I just wanted to read that to you on Gramsci. So pervasive is the progressive mindset in America today that even the dreaded NRA itself has been reduced to futile exercise of championing the individual rights and to keep and bear arms from within the very same progressive mindset and collectivist context of human rights. Yes. Where Amnesty International goes after the individual right to arms in America as a human rights issue with, quote, we all want to be safe and secure and to live without fear. And that's a human right. The public has a human right to live without fear. Well, if that's the case, then the government's violating human rights by putting out all that fear porn they did with COVID, right? Just saying. In the human rights or the medical freedom movement out there, backing up the whole novel virus narrative and the whole gain of function narrative and the whole PCR narrative and the whole asymptomatic spread narrative and the whole zootonic jump shit's going to happen, man. Right? And the whole synthetic biology narrative. They're perpetuating the same fear. I'm just saying. So we all want to be safe, okay? Yeah, we have a right to live without fear, and that's a human right that we all have. But in the U.S., gun violence is an epidemic that directly threatens these rights, and Amnesty International is addressing it as a human rights crisis. It is. We work with local, state, and national coalitions to put gun violence into broader human rights context. Yeah, that was Amnesty International. But where they go after individual rights to arms in America as a human rights issue, with that, the NRA comes at gun rights as a human right too, and they say self-defense is a basic human right. So now you've got a human right of the public, the collective human right of the public to a safe and sound, basically to a gun-free America. Okay. A gun-free world, because guns are violence. You got to remember, from the collectivist perspective, they don't want an armed populace. They don't want an armed populace. And when you get that collectivist mindset, you get that sense of conformity, that just spontaneous consent. You don't even think about it, just surrender. You don't even think about it. Well, it's part of the training. Part of the collectivist mindset training. So you got the NRA fighting against the human rights of the public for a gun-free America by saying that the right of the individual has a human right to a gun anyway. So whose human rights are going to weigh more? The collective or each individual human right to a gun? Alleged. You see what I'm saying? So the protection of that bedrock human right, eviscerated by a tyrannical government, lies at the heart of the historic challenge in D.C.'s gun ban. It is clear. Yeah, what was that? Heller case? Remember? Or the gun ban. Heller case supposedly fought for the gun case on an individual basis, an individual human rights basis, obviously, right? Lies at the heart of the historic challenge to D.C.'s gun ban. It is clear that D.C. gun ban laws denies that most fundamental basic human right of self-defense. They said human right in here like what? 3 times? Not more? The NRA. When does this... Yeah. But anyways. The only problem with that is that the NRA here is 180 degrees dead wrong in correlating gun ownership or any right to self-defense with human rights, period. Yeah, I said that 8 years ago. If the NRA doesn't understand that human civil rights and liberty are the diabolical antithetic opposites of individual rights and liberty established in our Declaration of Independence and secured in our Constitution, what chance do any of these kids ever have of ever hearing an articulated defense of the fundamental principles behind their own individual rights, any of their own individual rights, let alone come to understand them as worthy of every defense from any and every progressive infringement? These kids get taught this shit all day long at school, year after year after year. And all through college. I mean, you can't even get into med school till you basically pledge an oath to the whole woke agenda, right? You can't get into public health schools without swearing an oath to the whole woke agenda. The woke is what they call it, right? Right? Critical theory, critical race theory. As an advocate of the revolution, right? Change agent. So you have that. So, so let alone come to understand them as worthy of every defense from any and every progressive infringement. It's hard to undo all that. You're not going to undo 150 years of progress that brought us to this point. It's not going to happen in a day. It's not going to happen in a year. It's not going to, might not happen in our lifetime, but what I'm trying to do here at least is be able to keep the George Washington called it the sacred fire of liberty, but the sacred fire of liberty at this point is pretty much gone out, right? I mean, it doesn't have any real defense. It's given no voice. our individual rights and liberty, our founding republic is given little to no voice in contemporary politics at all. You know, what chance do they have? That's all they've been taught. That's all they know. That's all they know. Unless their parents are talking different to them at home, that's all they know. They don't even allow teachers to teach in some of these schools until they've been basically debriefed, put through a decompression chamber to, cure them of their whiteness, to cure them of their capitalism, to cure them of their implicit bias or whatever, right? Yeah, because, it's nuts. So, yeah. Yeah. What are the chances that they might ever hear, let alone come to understand it's not freedom or liberty of their countrymen at all that's leaving them, their classmates, friends, and their teachers unarmed and defenseless in the face of the depraved indifference of such crazed individuals that come to shoot up the safe spaces of such gun-free zones? It is the revolutionary progressive collectivism that has extra-constitutionally created them, that is. Yeah, so they go out and they establish these areas where the Constitution doesn't apply, even though the Constitution is supposed to limit government. Now you got government basically making Constitution-free zones. Yeah. So what real representation do our founding principles actually have there? Or is my idea of what our founding principles too antiquated? I need to get with it with the new. Maybe I need to get with it with the new definition of what America is according to the revolution against it, right? It's out there. Yeah. It is the revolutionary progressive collectivism that has extra-constitutionally created them, that is. And it's that very same revolutionary progressive collectivism that they now turn to champion nothing but even more of the same. They're looking for more of the progressivism, more of the gun-free zones, more of safe spaces. Only in the revolutionary realm of progressive collectivism could progress be so wonderfully defined by what, from the outside, amounts to nothing more than a hapless fish in a barrel simply demanding more, if not all fish be put in the barrel with them to be saved. This is what it is. This is what it is. We as Americans were never meant to be so defenseless or so robbed of our freedom and dignity that any of us would ever feel forced to forego our own liberty, let alone the liberty of our fellow countrymen as well, to march for the heroic opportunity to beg for our lives from a lousy politician, no less, right? Or anybody else. Yet here we are. And what it all boils down to is mindset. It's mindset, right? For it is from our mindset that we view the world. From a collectivist mindset, there is nothing more contrary to the social spirit than the mental, physical, and spiritual autonomy of individual liberty. But from a liberty mindset, nothing could be more sacred. From a liberty mindset, nothing could be more degrading than being forced to live a life in compliance with the central plan or the general will of others by which collectivism is defined. The key to stepping outside the collective box, here, though, may be self-defense, for without it there can be no right to life itself for any of us, including these students. This is where I'm going to. Now, this whole general will, if you don't know what general will is, it comes right out of Rousseau's social contract. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's social contract, which is basically the whole social contract theory is kind of Rousseau's like top on the line at Hobbes, a little bit going back to Plato's too, centralized society where the individual is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, But that general will is if the individual doesn't want to comply, he will be forced to be free by the will of the general will. His individual will be forced to comply by the general will, which is the collective. Okay? And I got a thing that I'm showing you from the Brownstone that ran with, Robert Malone out there defending, literally speaking in the context of the general will and defense of individual rights. It's just bizarre. It's bizarre. I'll show you. We'll get to it. But anyways, yeah. That being forced to live a life in compliance with the central plan or general will of others by which collectivism is defined, right? The key to stepping outside the collective box here, though, may be self-defense, for without it, there can be no right to life itself for any of us, including these students. So I'm getting at. First, it must be understood that the right to self-defense is an individual right only. To understand why, it is to finally see and understand the stark difference between the collective serfdom of human rights and the freedom of individual rights. Only in the tenets of individualism does or can one's life have intrinsic value. There can be no intrinsic value to human life in a collective. The only value you have, you earn through your personality, and your personality is a reflection of your compliance to the duties owed to the collective. And personality is right in the Human Declaration of Human Rights. It's right in there. Personality throughout collectivist doctrine, anarchist doctrine, communist doctrine, it doesn't matter. Yeah. The measure of your compliance is your personality and how you fit as a cog into the wheel, of collective. How you, as an individual, fit into the organism of humankind or the organism of society, right? Yeah. Only in the tenets of individualism does or can one's life have intrinsic value. The only value you have in a collective is that value which you add to the collective. It's like a chicken farmer. I've said this before, but it's worth saying again. Chicken farmer raises chickens, and while they're laying eggs, all things are good. Those chickens matter. He's going to take care of them. But as soon as one stop laying eggs, or another one stops laying eggs, or all of them stop laying eggs, is he going to keep them? Is he going to keep feeding them? Is he going to keep up the expense and labor of taking care of these chickens if they're not producing eggs? No, he's going to be on the phone to the soup company. He's going to say, "Come get these chickens, man. They stop laying eggs, and I'll sell them to you for soup chickens." That's what he's going to do, or dog food, or whatever. But he's going to get rid of them, and he's going to bring in a new bunch that are just about ready past their molt or whatever it is, and then he's going to bring them in. And that's what they do. It's the utility. And individuals in a collective society are seen in the same light. I mean, George Bernard Shaw said the same shit, right? If you're in the canoe and you're not pulling your weight out of the canoe, you go, man. George Bernard Shaw. Malone quoted him, too, when he was at the Von Mises Institute. That's how he started. I want to start with a quote from George Bernard Shaw. Yeah. His defense of liberty and medical freedom based on the Fabian socialism of George Bernard Shaw. Just see it, man. It's there. All you got to do is look. Just trying to point some of these things out for your consideration. Right. So only in the tenets of individualism does or can anyone's life have intrinsic value. And therefore, only with the concept of individual liberty is our life worthy of the dignity of a right to self-preservation. Even the Human Rights Council on the United Nations itself has determined that there is no such thing as a human right to self-defense for any individual, be it armed or unarmed. This is straight out of the Frey Report. This is straight out of the Frey Report right here. This is a hard document to find, but but this is a hard document to find, but you can go there and you can read this. Okay? It's got a summary, and it's, a few pages long. Self-defense is an exemption. Self-defense is an exemption to criminal responsibility, not a human right. It's right there. It's right there. It's right there. See it right there. But anyways, just kind of wanted to show you that. Yeah, so even the Human Rights Council of the United Nations itself has determined, I'm not making this shit up, man. This UN itself, per the Frey report, July 6th, 2006, July 7th, 2006, I can't remember. No international human right of self-defense is expressly set forth in the primary sources of international law, treaties, customary law, or general principles. I can't get it. While the right to life is recognized in virtually every major international human rights treaty, similarly, international criminal law sets forth self-defense only as a basis for avoiding criminal responsibility, not as an independent right. Our natural individual rights and liberty. You have not only a right to life, not only is your life have intrinsic value, you have a right to life. You have a right to defend your life. And you have a right to the arms in which to defend your life, liberty, property, which are fruits of your labor, which is a fruit of your liberty. Right? Whatever meager amount that we own, that we've worked for, whatever meager stance in life that we've been able to obtain, we have a right. Our life is intrinsic. It has no less value than anybody else's life. We have a right to defend it. Yeah. That's what I'm getting at here. This is right from the UN. And so it is that the NRA is left only to argue the collectivism of human rights against the collectivism of human rights in the futile assertion that somehow an individual right could possibly prevail. An individual collective right could possibly prevail against collectivism. Whatever the social contract, whatever politics may be funded by such progressive folly, it is not going to be any stalwart defense of the fundamental principles of America as founded, or of individual liberty. In the collectivism of human rights, neither is there nor can there be any such thing as an individual right to life. In the collectivism of human rights. In the world socialism of human rights, right? There is no, I wrote this before the pandemic, but you can see how it correlates to the mandates of the pandemic. If you're arguing for your medical freedom within the context of the collectivism of these human rights, civil rights, human civil rights from human civil origin, whatever, there is no such thing, nor can there be any such thing as an individual right to anything. All rights in collectivism are collective rights. Even the individual human rights are collective rights still. They're conditional they're conditional. There's a lien. There's a social lien on those rights where the social contract says that the needs of the collective, they're only yours so long as it serves the collective. They're yours only so long as it meets the needs of the central planners or the king or the prince or whoever is running the society. Yeah. In a collectivism, the human rights, neither is there any nor can there be any such thing as an individual right to life. So when they're arguing for your liberty and defense of medical freedom within the context of these human rights, where there can be no individual right to not take the jab, there's no such thing as an individual human right to not take the jab if it's what the planners have deemed is what's best for the collective. If the general will of society that has, in the spontaneous consent of the collectivist mindset is demanding of you and will force you into compliance to the general will, there's no such thing as an individual human right to not take the jab. There's no such thing as an individual human right. There cannot be. Doctrinarily impossible for there to be an individual right, human right, to anything that the planners have deemed you must do or must not do. You can't have anything against that. Take the jab. You don't have a choice. And you had an individual human right up until the point that the collective said, well, but now we're overruling that. There's no such thing as an individual human right to not wear a mask. There's no such thing as an individual human right to not social distance or to comply or lock down. And this is where you can see how fighting for these things as the medical freedom has done in the context of human rights is nothing more than codifying and enshrining the slave speak of the world socialism of collectivism, the world socialism of human rights, into the mindset and legal structure of our society. That's what it is. This is kind of where I'm going here. In the collectivism of human rights, only the collective or society at large is worthy of the dignity of a right to life. Sorry, let me see it again. In the collectivism of human rights, only the collective or society at large is worthy of the dignity of a right to life, as that same UN document, the Frey Report, goes on to clarify in 34. Even if there were a human right to self-defense, this is key. Even if there were a human right to self-defense, it would not negate the state's due diligence responsibility to maximize protection of the right to life for the society. The state must consider the community as a whole. This is where the collectivism of human rights reality kind of rises to the top and exposes itself if you but look to see it. And this is why I'm going back to 2018. It was the same then as it is now. I'm not calling this shit out, these guys out, these medical freedom people out. I'm not calling them out. I'm not calling out the Brownstone. I'm not calling out Malone. I'm not calling out Shannon Joy. Even Shannon Joy, time and time again, has told me that I'm wrong about this human rights thing, but I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong. I'm not calling them out to shit on them. Unless they're doing it on purpose. Then I'll shit on them. I don't give a shit. But if they're truly trying to help people, which I don't see any evidence of whatsoever, but if they are truly fighting for medical freedom and they're doing all this and they're like, holy shit, Joe, frick, damn, you're right. Probably easier to thread a camel through the eye of a needle, right? But anyways, only in understanding the fundamental and universal tenets of collectivism can we come to understand both how and why in a collective it is philosophically impossible for any individual citizen's life to ever have any intrinsic value and thereby be worthy of an individual right to life. In a collective, the only value one's life can possibly have is the value which he or she is adding to the collective via the performance of their duties owed to society, and that's how you earn your personality. Your personality only through performing your duties. I think that's how the Declaration of Human Rights says it. Only through the performance of your duties can your personality be formed, or some shit like that. Yeah, only through the performance of your duties, which is what then in turn justifies the necessary utility in progressive collectivism of both a pre-person and post-person status. Yeah. Only in collectivism is there a person, a pre-person, and a post-person status. Like I said, the only value you have is what you add to collective. Pre-person status, when you're born, fetuses, they declare that the fetus is just like Dred Scott. Dred Scott was declared in that Supreme Court's case, which was a hostile progressive case with a hostile interpretation of our Constitution, said that blacks didn't have person status because it was made for white people, blah, 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 right? Well, that was the progressive anti-Constitution, hostile anti-Constitution interpretation, which led to the Civil War, which, if our Constitution ever was philosophically aligned with slavery, the South wouldn't have had to secede from the Union and write a new one of their own that wasn't, in support of slavery. But that whole Dred Scott case, no person status, an unborn child in the womb, no person status. And there's people out there fighting for, was it a Zeke Emanuel? When that whole, his whole, anybody over 70 years old shouldn't be going to the hospital and just go off all medications, just basically die because you're just a dragon anchor for society, right? That's collectivism, man. That's the collectivist social contract thing. So, but anyways, let me see. In a collective, only the only value that one's life can possibly have is that value which he or she is adding to the collective via the performance of their duties to society. You owe to society. Yeah, they're owed because your collective rights, you don't get them for nothing. You owe. You're indebted for life for them, which is we'll get into that. Which is what then in turn justifies the necessary utility in progressive collectivism of both pre-person and post-person status. It must be understood that any and all rights that you have claim to in a shared responsibility, that was like Hillary's famous thing, Clinton's, shared responsibility reality of a centrally planned, remember shared responsibility for shared prosperity or some shit like that? Yeah, the shared responsibility reality of a centrally planned, collectivist, sustainable society are every single one of them conditional. They're all conditional. All collective rights are conditional. Auguste Comte, was the founder of both altruism and the directed science of sociology. They call it the queen of all sciences. And the way the queen of all sciences work is that he would say that all the sciences of the world, even math, would all be funneled through sociology and made and re-geared in order to further the progressive evolution, the progress or evolutionary progress of humanity from our free society or whatever society that we live in today towards the eventual end of collectivism of a single global human organism, like a giant beehive or ant colony with one queen or one group of central planners. Yeah. Okay. And this is Auguste Comte. They teach it in society. They teach it in school today. This whole society is an organism. Humanity is an organism. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, Hobbes' Great Leviathan, too. It was all society is a organism. They teach it as structural functionalism or something like that, they call it. Yeah. So, yeah, they're all conditional. Auguste Comte was the founder of both altruism, which is living for the sake of others. Nobody but a slave lives for the sake of others. From a liberty perspective, just saying. Yeah. And the directed science of sociology that these kids and their teachers, these kids at this school, Florida school, and their teachers have all been so thoroughly steeped in, as per their specifically enumerated positive human right to a directed education. Yeah. Auguste Comte was the founder of both the altruism and directed science of sociology, queen of all sciences, that these kids and their teachers have all been so thoroughly steeped in, along with the critical theory, critical pedagogy, critical curricula, which are in almost all the schools now. All right. Let me see. Where were we? Oh, yeah. Yeah, directed education. Directed education. Let me see. Yeah, Article 26. Can you see that? Article 26, everybody has a right to education. This is a positive right. Education shall be free. Same in prison. Same shit. They have the same right in prison, too. Because why? Because they've lost the liberty to provide any of this shit for themselves. Everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, and at least in the elementary and fundamental stages, elementary education shall be compulsory. It shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally. Oh, I don't know what my camera's doing, man. It's wigging out. Supposedly, maybe it'll come back. I don't know. It's wigging out, man. Okay. Come back to me. I don't know what the hell's happening. Education shall be directed, okay, to the full development of the human personality. Right there. Shall be to the full directed to the full development of your personality and to strengthen the respect for human rights and the fundamental freedoms. This is what your right to education is. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial and religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations. Can't be put any simpler. All you got to do is read the Declaration of Human Rights to see what they are. And understand what the words are saying and understand what they mean by the words that they're saying. You know? I mean, I was talking to somebody today out there. I mean, and went and did a job estimate today. I went and looked at a job, was doing an estimate, and I was talking to the lady. People today, the convolution of what the meaning of words that people are using out there is purposefully being, convoluted, right? It's being confused. And that's because you got to understand from a revolutionary perspective, more and more chaos is just more revolutionary progress in progress. That's all it is, But people, we can be using the same words. We could be using the same words in a conversation and be speaking opposite languages. We can be using all the same words and understand each other totally opposite from what we mean. And I've told these people this before too. I mean, back in the 40s, 50s, when Friedrich Hayek was talking in his Road to Serfdom, he's speaking of liberals, right? Liberals. The liberal society, even mentioned in the Communist Manifesto. And you can go back in a lot of different doctrines. They speak of liberals and libertarian liberals or liberalism. Now, But what they mean there is people who basically defended our founding principles, people who, defended laissez-faire, people who defended free market capitalism, people who defended property rights, rugged individualism, individual liberty, a free society. Today, liberalism, or, recently in the 70s, kind of the liberals have taken on the name progressive or flat out socialist back again. They started calling themselves the socialists they've always been, and Bernie Sanders are the progressives they've always been. We used to talk about owning the libs when the right, the nationalists, start talking about owning the libs, and the liberals, or Rush Limbaugh used to talk about liberals and liberalism. Totally opposite meaning than what Friedrich Hayek and his Road to Serfdom meant. So if you don't understand how the meanings of words have changed, and I don't care if it's capitalism, I don't care if it's what individual rights and liberty are, I don't care if it's what human rights are, they've always been the same thing, regardless of whatever meaning you're applied to it, or mismeaning, or wrongful meaning. They are what they are. Always have been. But you can go back and read these critical documents and to understand, if you want to learn the fight between Keynesian economics and, a free society economics, or as close to it as you're probably going to get anywhere in the Road to Serfdom, Hayek's Road to Serfdom, you literally risk reading these things in reverse if you're not aware of how the meanings in these words have changed. Just to put that out there. So Auguste Comte, the founder of both altruism and the directed science of sociology, that these kids and their teachers have all been so thoroughly steeped in, as per their specifically enumerated positive human right to a directed education, like we just said, and is a case in point per Anthony Harris Barbet at Philosophical Connections. Auguste Comte, favored rule by knowledgeable experts who would have to be obeyed by the people because the rulers know best. That's the same for nationalism. The National Conservative Conference, they all talked about the same shit, right? That's the same for the World Economic Forum, the technocrats, because they're all the same collectivism. It's the same for humanism, right? It's the same deal with the socialized liberalism, or the social liberalism of the National Conservatives' favorite. They're John Stuart Mill and Bentham, I can't remember his name, or Sidgwick, the kind of a collectivization of liberalization that they represented, right? That's what we're dealing with here. Comte favored rule by knowledgeable experts, and it's just a commonality in collectivism. Anarchists might be about the only collectivism that, even some of those, who knows. There is thus no place in the scheme for rights of individuals. Rulers know best. There is thus no place in this scheme for the rights of individuals. It is therefore only in this context, which emphasizes duties through which you need to complete and comply with in order. That's how your personality is formed. The concept of rights through which emphasizes duties. It is therefore only in this context which emphasizes duties, the concept of rights of any kind can have any application. Humanity, the great being, takes the place of God and is the basis of all morality. And that's the other thing when you come into this collectivism. I don't care if you're an anarchist, anarcho-capitalist who's fighting for individualism, and people who say that, human rights, we have natural human rights. It's not the natural law. God's law individual rights. They're not talking about that. They're talking about a secularized natural right that comes as just being human. You know? But anyways, I got that spelled out for you. It's the commonality on most all collectivism is like I said before, you can't make an argument for a collectivist society without first making an argument against the very existence of God, unless they want to present a religion or a state religion or state God, because of course in the same collectivist doctrine, people need something that's has more value than themselves, that is more valuable than themselves, and something for which they can live and die for. All right, they all call for the same kind of shit, you know. Only in the collectivism of a progressive society have there been human lives, American lives, deemed unworthy of the dignity of personhood or due process. So go ahead and be a champion, just like the unborn and Dred Scott. So go ahead and be a champion of the collectivism of human rights, but just remember, no right to self-defense, no right to life, and vice versa. Also, no right to keep and bear arms. No real or actual right to self-defense, or for that matter, a right to life itself. You can't have a right to life if you don't have a right to defend it. You can't possibly have a right to arms in a collectivist human right that recognizes the collective's right over your right to be safe, kept safe from your guns and you having guns. So the state is obligated, according to the same human rights, to make the collective safe by removing those guns or severely restricting them if you have them at all. It can't be anything else. That's right doctrine. That's collectivist doctrine. See it. It's never been the rightful defender who gets to determine by what limited means an effective and successful defense would be necessary for any situation, right? But to the contrary, it has always been and always will be the unlimited means, time and circumstances of the offender's choosing that determines it. I mean, we never know what we're going to be facing and what we're going to need at the circumstance to defend ourselves or others, a third person, our family. We don't know. But if we're limited to freaking 5 shots, or we're limited to 10 shots in a single shot, or whatever we're limited to, who knows what the defender who's not going to obey the laws anyways, if he's there to shoot up something, right? Or shoot up some people, or just whatever. He's unlimited. Unlimited. Especially if the kid who's shooting up the place, Cruz was his name, right? Progressive programs. There was a thing called the Promise Program, if you remember, right? It was Obama's administration put this thing through called the Promise Program because of the disparate impact. It's all part of critical theory, critical race theory shit, where they went out there with the disparate impact of the prison to pipeline thing. They said, we got to stop the school to prison pipeline. So when kids get in trouble and they break the law, we're not going to send them to see the law. We're not going to send them to see the law. The kid would have had a record. He would have had a record and not been able to buy any gun, you know, if that Promise Program wasn't there, or potentially wouldn't have been able to buy it. But these progressive programs, they made it a safe zone. They made it a gun-free zone. They made it a constitution-free zone. And then they made it so this kid could go out and buy a gun, even though he shouldn't have been able to, because he should have had a record, but he wasn't turned in, and they didn't follow through because of this progressive program called the Promise Program that was feeding the accusatory against America as a inherently white supremacist, whiteness of America kind of thing, right? It all comes out of the same collectivism. So, yeah. Then we've got, let's see. It's never been the rifle defender who gets to determine by what limited means an effective, successful defense would be necessary. But to the contrary, it has always been and always will be the unlimited means, time, and circumstance of the offender's choosing that determines it. Yeah. It's only a life of limited worth, or for cruel sport, that is afforded only a limited means by which to defend themselves against an unlimited unknown. That's where we are with all these, they want to limit the number of guns now, the number of bullets that your guns can have, the number of bullets your magazine can hold. Eventually, they just want to take the guns away. You know, it's only a life of zero worth whose means have been criminalized. Means of self-defense has been criminalized and or extinguished altogether. Those kids in them schools, anybody in them schools, your rights have been extinguished. You have to, like they said at that one school shooting, and the teacher told the kids to get underneath the desk and show me your smile. Show me your smile. Well, the guy's right there shooting up the place. That's where we are. Yeah. What real means of self-defense are being afforded anybody in our schools by the progressive state of gun-free zones? Jean-Jacques Rousseau spells it out pretty clearly for us as to why this is so. Okay? Book 2, Chapter 5 of his 1762 Social Contract, as he put it, he who wills the collective ends, he who wills the end wills the means also. I just put in there, it's a collective means to a collective ends. Yeah, collective means to a collective end. So he who wills the end wills the means also, and the means must involve some risk. The means must involve some risk and even some losses. Furthermore, and in such a collective society, as he plainly spells out, quote, the citizen is no longer the judge of the dangers to which the law desires him to expose himself. Furthermore, the citizen is no longer the judge of the dangers to which the law desires him to expose himself. This is the collectivism of human rights. This is the social context of human rights. And when the prince says to him, it is expedient for the state that you should die, he ought to die. Because it is only on that condition, it's only on that condition that he has been living in the security up to the present, and because his life is no longer a mere bounty of nature, but a gift made conditionally by the state. Your life is a gift made conditionally by the state. This is the doctrine that social contract theory comes out of. This is the collectivism. This is the collectivism that academia is spinning, that puts it out there, that made man free. Man is born free, yet everywhere he's in chains. That's how the social contract theory starts out. But those chains he's talking to are state of nature, where you have no freedom until human law comes along and passes a law that says this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad, this is legal, this is illegal, this is what just and this is unjust. It can only happen through human law, through human civil action, to force us to be free, as Rousseau said, right? This is the point that I'm getting across. Now, when you understand that today, 7 years later, after we just went through that COVID-19 freaking pandemic shit, right? The citizen is no longer... Now, understand this in the context of the pandemic and the jabs and the face masks and the social distancing and the lockdowns and the dangers that the vaccine potentially cause for people, the dangers that the compromise, and loss of liberties and freedom or whatever. Right? The citizen is no longer the judge of the dangers to which the law desires him to expose himself. Because you remember, when we come into a collective society, because of that state of nature, which is a war of every man against every man, and of course, human law and human society is going to save us from that. We have to surrender. It's a mutual surrender of our natural, God-given natural law, God's law, liberty, in order, before we can accept our allowed ration of a redistributed ration of it back to us. It's the opposite of our Declaration of Independence. Opposite. Because it's only on that condition that he has been living in the security up to the present. So it's the state that made it so that your life, you could have a life, and that you were living in security, and that you had all the things that you had. It's only because of the state. Only because of the collective. So, not only do you not have a human right to not take the jab, this is why. This is why you don't have a human right, or a collective individual right, which is an individual human right, same shit. You don't have an individual right to not take the jab for this reason. A citizen is no longer the judge of the dangers to which the law desires him to expose himself, and when the prince or collective says to him it is expedient for the state that you die, how could you have a right to not take a vaccine? See what I'm saying? And with this, we come to the essential fundamental difference between the human civil rights of collectivism and our individual rights and liberty. Where our individual rights and liberty are natural, being endowed by our Creator, be it nature or nature's God. You don't have to believe in God for this. Your Creator, you're endowed by your Creator, be it nature or nature's God. Okay? They are freely given to us. Stand fast in the liberty, which I have freely given to you. Don't be caught up in the yoke of bondage, which is these human rights, which is the collectivism of these human rights. In other words, we are indebted to or enslaved by no man or civil government as a condition for them whatsoever. They are, as John Locke points out, of natural law, that is God's law, from nature or nature's God. They are thus wholly above and beyond any and all secular, social, and civil jurisdiction. They are unalienable. In our Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. It's not inalienable. Unalienable. Now, if you know what, do you have a car? You have a loan. You buy a car you get a loan, and you buy something. You don't actually own it. It's not yours. You have a house with a mortgage. You don't actually own it. It's not yours. You have a contract that with conditions. That contract isn't yours unless you meet those conditions. Those are liens. There's liens on that. There's conditions for you that you must meet in order for you to maintain and keep that house, to keep that car, to meet your obligations for that contract. Those are liens. There are no liens. There can be no liens put on our natural, endowed by our Creator rights. They're out of civil jurisdiction. They're out of human civil jurisdiction. We owe no man for that shit. None. To the contrary. However, the inalienable human civil rights of collectivism are not natural at all, but rather of human civil origin. This is where I'm going. This is the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Go down to the preamble. Okay. Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom and justice and world peace. The recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights. They're inalienable, which means they can't be separated. But can't be separated from what? And what I'm telling you is that they're inalienable because they can't be separated from the social contract duties owed to society in return. They're inalienable from the social contract responsibilities, which would include that if the prince says you die, you should die. There can be no individual human right to not take the jab and run that risk. That's not your risk. You're not the judge of the risk because your liberties and freedoms and even your very life are no longer a mere bounty of nature. I don't know what the hell is this thing. It's just like going all kinds of crazy. I don't know. Let me see if I can get it to count. I don't know what. I don't know who pushed the button to make it do that. I don't know. I'll figure it out, I guess. But anyways, that's where we are. The difference between people talking about our inalienable rights or inalienable rights or inalienable rights, that's slave speak, man. Human rights are slave speak. Inalienable rights are slave speak for the slave speak of human rights. Collectivism. Unalienable. There can be no lien put on our rights. We're not obligated. They're ours. Big difference. Big difference. To the contrary, however, the inalienable human civil rights of collectivism are not natural at all, but rather human civil origin. They are but the allowed meager redistributed ration of the natural God-given liberty that must first be, per collective social contract, be surrendered to obtain. They call it a mutual, when we come into society from the state of nature, they call it a mutual surrender of our natural rights. And then what were the allowed meager ration or redistributed ration of them. So we have to surrender all our liberty in order to get back our collective ration. That's what collective rights are. That's what human rights are. Human civil rights of human civil origin are. How do we this is why collectivism is the evil on earth if ever there was one. Because how is there possibly more to be gained by surrendering the whole of our natural, surrendering our natural endowed by our Creator rights and liberty for a mere ration back from government, right? How is there more to be gained by a product of our liberty than there is from the whole of our liberty? Because governments derive their power from the consent of the governed, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. They get our power from us. They are a product of our liberty. Our government was a product of our liberty. Our republic, our constitution, our founding republic and constitutional republic is a product of our liberty. How do we stand to get more from a product of our liberty than from the whole of our liberty? How we ever got sold on that is testament to the depravity and just, I don't know, maniacal genius, of collectivism. It is the evil on earth if ever there was one. It literally sells slavery as your only possible emancipation and literally sells liberty and true freedom as slavery. So it sells slavery as freedom and freedom as slavery. and we bought it. That's where we are. But we are thus per the duties, responsibilities now owed aspect of some. Wait a minute. To the contrary, however, the inalienable human civil rights of collectivism are not natural at all, but rather of human civil origin. Yes, they are, but the allowed, meager, redistributed ration of the natural God-given liberty that must first, per collectivist social doctrine, be surrendered to obtain. We are thus, per the duties and responsibilities now owed. Okay, Comte, it can't be spoken of, our rights, our liberties cannot be spoken of outside the context of the duties owed to the collective, right? That we now owe aspect of that same social contract, forever indebted to the state or collective for any and all of these now, per social contract, conditional collective rights and liberties. We've enslaved ourselves. We've surrendered the liberty freely given to us for the yoke of bondage, which is this. And that's scripture. That's scripture. I don't know. I don't have it right. Ephesians. I can't remember what it is. Right offhand, anyways. Why? Because again, as Rousseau just pointed out, nothing in a collective, not even our life, is a mere bounty of nature, but a gift now made conditionally by the state. Put simply, a social lien has been put on you, your life, and everything that you are and have. Put simply, the state in such a state, as Rousseau also explained in book 4, chapter 8 of his Social Contract, collectivism effectively becomes its own religion, making country the object of the citizens' adoration, teaches them that service done to the state is service done to its tutelary God. I think Hobbes referred to the state or the collective or the Leviathan as a mortal god. It is a form of theocracy in which there can be no pontiff save the prince, no priest save the magistrate. To die for one's country then becomes martyrdom, violation of its laws, impiety, and to subject one who is guilty to public execration is to condemn him to the anger of the gods. General will. That's the general will. So it is again that despite what we say, be it in either collectivism or individualism, you will have your God. That's my point, too. Either way, you will have your God. With one, there's free will. The other, a life of servitude, slavery, indebtedness, duties owed, responsibilities. You're caught. Yeah. So with be it either with collectivism or individualism, you will have your God. Only with one, there's free will, individual liberty, and the dignity of a right to life and self-defense, and therefore a right to arms in which to defend it with. But with the other, only the serfdom of an eternal indebtedness and servitude from which not just the students in school, but every single one of us will forever be forced to beg for our lives. That's where I'm going. From the very same planners who would at once refuse us the dignity of any right and wherewithal to ever defend ourselves on any occasion, for the sake of not only ourselves, but for posterity, which is our children and grandchildren and generations unborn. Now would be the time to think outside the collective box of progressive thought that got us here, and choose wisely. I wrote that shortly after that shooting, and I saw how they were using those kids. And that's the other thing too, is I just went over here. For the sake of not only ourselves, but for posterity and generations unborn. That's one of the things that, it's in Indian people, American Indian people, that they have, that is something that maybe we can take into consideration too is they consider things traditionally 7 generations ahead. The 7th generation, they're thinking of 7 generations, the implications of what happens today and their actions today, what that implication will have 7 generations down the road. These rights and liberty that have been surrendered through with our collectivist mindset that we are in the process of still surrendering, and mostly have already almost completely surrendered at this point, were never ours or any generations to surrender. If you read, is it? I can't remember. Is it in the Constitution or Declaration of Independence? It's posterity that's capitalized. It's posterity that's capitalized. But I don't have that here with me. But they were never ours to give away or to surrender. They belong to posterity. They belong to our children. They belong to our grandchildren. At least 7 generations down the road, in perpetuity, really. But as that sacred fire, as George Washington called it, becomes extinguished, at least we can try and, now's not the time for sunshine patriots either. We can't give up. You can't surrender. So maybe this whole idea of America still exists as an idea, and that's what it was. It started out as an idea. The idea of America, a free society. We could hand the idea of what America is, founding principles down, what actual individual rights and liberty are, and what the actual enslavement of collective rights are, even individual rights are. They're still the same enslavement. We can hand these things down in torch form to the next generations if we can even find anybody who wants to pick up that torch, so that they can take it into the future generations, and so that they can hand it down to whoever at which time is good to maybe relight that sacred fire, and not only America but humanity at large can have the chance to actually be free and not just live in the conformity that's been taught to them as freedom, and not just live in the conformity that's been taught to them as freedom. It's and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up on this in my next show. I'm going to pick up on this and get into the brownstones within the same limited spectrum of debate of fighting for freedom and liberty, from the perspective and in the context of the of the collectivism that is targeted for destruction. It's targeted them for destruction. If you're going to argue against the collectivism of social or redistributive rights of human rights, right? The collectivism. If you're going to argue against the collectivism of human rights by saying that the individual rights, which are still collective rights, where does collectivism not win in that? Where does liberty not lose? Where does actual individual rights and liberty and our founding principles not lose in that? This is where I'm going. Just trying to put it out there for your consideration. I appreciate you stopping by The Liberty Perspective. I hope you got something out of it. And, I'll pick this back up with the next show with the brownstone, and we'll get right into this again. I'm Joe Marshall. Thanks for stopping by, and look forward to our next show.